Let's take some time to review how procedures are implemented in the Visual Logic programming environment. So we're looking at a very simple program that reads some input from the user and then echoes that information back to the user. And this is a regular program. So just by looking at it, you can see it's something very similar to what we've written already. So I'm going to run this program, and it's going to ask me to enter my name. I'm going to enter a string with my name, and I'll hit OK. And then I'll go to the output block, and note it says, "Hello, Jason, nice to meet you." And this is a really nice little interaction that we've got here. So let's look at how we can convert this into a procedure and use this as an opportunity to think a little bit about creating procedures and how that's done in Visual Logic. So one of the things I'm going to do is first direct our attention up to this top menu where there's a procedures menu. And one of the things you'll note is that there's already a procedure present in this application, and that's called the main procedure. And all applications in Visual Logic have a main procedure. It's essentially the programs that we've been writing are actually encapsulated in a procedure. It's called main. We don't really think about it as a procedure. We just think of it as our program. But if we think of procedures as a way to encapsulate code or take lines of instructions and group them together, it makes sense that really defines a program as well as a subset of that program. And so what you'll notice, the main method will always be there for all the programs you write in Visual Logic. And if I come to the item below it, it says Add New Procedure. So there's two ways to do this. You can click on Add New Procedure here, and another item is you will note that you can also do it by right-clicking in the timeline of your application and selecting Add New Procedure from the Call Procedure menu system. I'm going to go ahead and actually utilize the Add New Procedure menu item up to the left. So when we create a new procedure, what's going to happen is it's going to ask us for the name that we want the procedure to have. And we're going to put the name of the procedure here. And for now, we won't put any arguments. What we're going to do, though, is go ahead and add them as we modify this as we move forward. One quick thing I'm going to do before I create my procedure is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this code. So one of the things you'll note is that a lot of times when you write a program, what happens is you write it and you go, wow, I think that would work better as a procedure, or that's an awful lot of code. I think I can make that into a procedure to kind of help make my code more modular, more readable, and kind of just get this stuff out of the way. I think you've all noticed that some of the programs that we've written in Visual Logic, they get to be really, really big, sprawling graphs, and it can be difficult to follow them. We have to zoom in, scroll side to side. So sometimes even you dropping things into a procedure to make things more readable is a good idea. So again, what I did was I highlight this, I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to go back up here, and I'm going to say, okay, Add New Procedure. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this a name, and my plan is to call this Custom Hello. And again, procedure naming conventions should follow the same conventions as naming variables. And in my specific case, I want to be consistent with my naming convention. So since I used a lowercase first letter and a capitalized inner cap for my variable name, I'm going to do the same thing for for my procedure name. And for right now, I'm going to do, or I'm not going to have any arguments. So what we're going to end up with is a procedure that accepts no arguments. And I'm going to hit OK. And what happens is when you hit OK in Visual Logic, you get dumped into the procedure editor. And you can tell that you're editing a procedure and not your main method, because now you'll see these vertical black bars on either side of this rectangle, and you'll see the name of your procedure in the purple blocks. And one of the things to note is you can jump between various procedures by going to the procedure menu. So note that I can go back to my main procedure. And notice this isn't labeled main. Again, you'll see begin and end, but that's how you know you're looking at the main procedure. And actually, my naming convention for my procedures is probably off, because notice that main is a capital M. Maybe I should have followed that convention, but we'll just keep moving forward. So let's say I want to create my custom procedure. Notice that when I select Custom Hello Procedure again, it's like I'm writing a totally separate program. And that's the idea of procedures. Oftentimes, you are writing like a totally separate, tiny little program that when put together with all of these other totally separate, tiny little programs will make your big program. So what I'm going to do is take the code that I previously had copied, and I'm going to paste it into my procedure. I could actually go ahead and just, as we have done in the past in Visual Logic, gone in and done this directly in my procedure. But I think what you're going to find is this process of refactoring Refactoring is a formal term that basically just means go back and fix things and make them better. And in this case, I'm going to do a little refactoring because maybe I wrote this initially in my main method. And I was like, this should probably be in a procedure. So we're good. So I've got this procedure. I'm happy with it. I'm now going to jump back to my main method. And now I don't need this anymore. So I'm going to delete it. So what I want to do is when my program begins, I want to actually call my procedure. And so one of the cool things is once you've written a procedure, just like you would add any other logic block in Visual Logic, you can go to the Call Procedure menu, and there is your custom procedure, custom hello. And I'm going to put it in there. And now, instead of seeing, several lines of code, that really big output statement that was taking up a lot of screen space, this is really condensed, very easy to read. And if you look at this and you say, wow, I wonder what custom hello is. Well, it's a custom procedure because, again, here's these vertical black bars on either side. And if you want to see what the code is behind the scenes, you can just always go to your procedure menu, select custom hello, and see what's there, and then jump back to your main method. So now if I run this, what you're going to notice, it works exactly as it did before. And I can hit OK. And my code works just as it did before. What happens is the code starts, it calls the custom hello procedure. All the code inside of the custom hello procedure then runs in turn, and then the program ends. So this is the basics of making a procedure. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start to think about some different ways that we can modify this. And so what I'll do is I'll create some new procedures that do similar things to custom hello, but demonstrate how we can use parameters. So one of the decisions that I made when I set up my custom hello procedure was that I copied all of the code in my main procedure into my custom hello procedure. So one of the problems that might arise with this is, please note that now I have the input block inside of my procedure. And that means anytime that I call this custom hello procedure, that it's going to stop and wait for the user to enter a value into the pop-up window. And this means that this procedure is less reusable than it could be. Let's say, for example, I wanted to read a bunch of names in from an external file, and I wanted to use a loop to print out customized hello statements to everybody whose name was in that file. Well, if I were to call this procedure the way it's written, that wouldn't work, because what would happen is it would just kind of pause and wait for the user to enter a value every time, and that just wouldn't really be a good idea. So what I'm going to do is copy this output block, and I'm going to create a new procedure with just this output block. So I'm going to go back up here to my procedure menu, and I'm going to add a new procedure. And I'm going to call this procedure custom hello parameter. And you don't need to use the word parameter in here. I'm just using that because it'll be an easier label so we can identify which specific version of this procedure we're looking at. And you'll note the last time we did this, the one thing we skipped was this block over here on the right called arguments. And this is where we can set up what I'll say are the ways that you can pass values into a procedure. So instead of having this pause every time, like the previous version did, to get input from the user, we want to be able to pass the value into the method, or the procedure, at the time we call it. Sometimes I'll say method. I'll apologize now. It's another name that's somewhat interchangeable with procedures and functions. I mostly teach Java, so I tend to fall back on some of that nomenclature. So apologies if I say that. I really mean procedure. So let's add an argument to this procedure. I'm going to click new, and I'm going to give it a name. And I'm actually going to call it name because the thing I want to pass into this variable or into this procedure is going to be a name. I'm not going to worry about this pass by radio buttons for now. We'll talk about these a little more when we get to Python. So for now, just leave this as pass by value and know that this will work as intended. And so when I hit OK, what you're going to note is that basically what I've defined is the formal parameter for this procedure. If I wanted to pass in multiple items, we could keep hitting new, and we'll come back and we'll write another version of this that does exactly that. So let's go ahead and hit OK. And now we have our new procedure. And note this looks a little different. It says custom hello parameter, and even though the name wraps here, you'll see that there's a parenthesis, N-A-M-E parenthesis. And this should look an awful lot like the intrinsic functions that we've been using, like random. Notice that there's a set of parentheses, and inside those parentheses is the parameter. All right, this is the formal argument for the thing that we're going to pass into our procedure. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and paste in that output block that I had before. Now notice though, previously I had a variable called user input that was associated with the input block. It's not there anymore. What I want to do is I want to use the variable that I defined as my formal parameter. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to change that from user input to name, because that is the name of my formal parameter. The user is going to pass a value into this procedure. That value will get stored in the name variable, and then I can use that name variable anywhere in this procedure to access the value that the user passed into this procedure. So this is the only change. I've removed the input statement. This no longer requires that this procedure, every time it's called, pop up a pop-up window so that the user can wait to enter a value. It's a little more flexible and reusable to me. So what I'm going to do is go back to my main procedure, delete my old custom hello procedure, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add or call my custom hello parameter procedure. Now note, it looks just like the other one. The name's longer. There's the vertical bars. But note, one thing I can do now is double click on this, and you will note that it will show me not just the name of the procedure, but the arguments. So when I defined this procedure, I set up an argument called name, and I'm going to pass a value into that. So for now, I'm going to pass in my name as a string. So the formal parameter is the name of the variable that is going to be required by the procedure, and the value I'm putting into that argument is JSON. So if I hit OK, you'll note that this actually fits here, and you'll see that the string wraps, but you'll note that the string JSON is being passed into this procedure. So let me run it, and you'll note that it says right away, hello JSON, nice to meet you. Why? Because I passed the string JSON into the procedure. If I go to my procedure editor, you'll note that it then stored that name JSON into the name variable. It then used that name variable, is referenced in this output block, and printed out the value. So my name, the double quoted string JSON, is the actual parameter that was stored in the formal parameter variable name. And that's why it's accessible inside of the procedure. Cool. So this is getting somewhere. So let's rewrite a new method, or let's start a new method. And this time I'm going to actually make the name of the method really short, so it's a little easier to see these values. So I'm going to go back up here, and I'm going to create a new procedure. And actually, again, I'm going to copy my output so I have it available for me. So I'm going to add a new procedure. And I'm going to call it CHP for custom hello parameter, and I'm going to put the number 2. So CHP2. Short name. Probably not the best name for a procedure, but I want to make sure that we don't have this case where parameters are wrapping. And I'm going to add 2 parameters. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to name the first parameter name, as I did before, because I want to pass in a name. And again, we're going to ignore pass by value for now. Now I'm going to ask, or I'm going to add a second argument. And remember, you can add as many arguments as you want. And I'm going to name this one number. And now I have set up a procedure with CHP2, which will stand for custom hello parameter 2, and it will accept 2 arguments, a name and a number. And I'm going to hit OK. And now see how it's easier to read because I used a short method name? Note that here's the name of the procedure, here's the name of the first parameter, and here's the name of the second parameter. Notice that the names of the parameters are descriptive of what should be put into them. These formal arguments will hold the things that the user passes into them. And so I'm going to go ahead and paste my output block. And what's nice is here, like, name already exists. So I can just leave this as is. I'm going to go ahead here and I'm now going to add a for loop. And I'm going to set up a loop variable called I. And I'm going to set the initial value to 1. And I'm going to set the final value to number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a loop that starts at 1 and runs up to the final value number. Whatever the user enters, that's how many times this loop will execute. And we'll step by 1. And what I'll do is drag my output in there. And now I have a procedure that lets the user define what name should be output and the number of times that name should be output. So I can have 2 parameters. The user will pass in a name, that gets printed here in the output. The user will pass in a number, an integer, And that will be used in this for loop to determine how many times the name should be printed. Let's go back to our main method and run this new procedure that accepts 2 parameters, and we'll see how that works. So remember, I'm going to double click on this, and now you'll see that there are 2 formal arguments listed. It requires a name, and it requires a number. And I'll hit OK, and we'll run it. And there's hello Jason, nice to meet you, 1, 2, 3. And so it printed 3 times. It said Jason was the number that I passed in, and I got 3 print statements because I passed in 3. Do I want to do this again? Sure. Go ahead, double click on it, and pass in the name Jane, and we'll make that print 6 times. And now note when this runs, it's going to print Jason 1, 2, 3 times, and then Jane 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we're done. Notice how it's easy for me to reuse this procedure, different parameters passed in, different actual parameters, right? Different values passed in as arguments. It's the same exact code. It's reusable. I can pass in different values. And if we go back in and look at our procedure, this code is now a reusable block of functionality that we can call over and over and over again. And if, for example, you didn't like the way it worked, I think one of the things that was kind of annoying about this is it kept using pop-up windows, is all I have to do is in one place go in here and change this to console, hit OK, and go back to my main procedure. And now if I run this, well, it still looks pretty bad, but notice now it all prints out at one time. I don't have to close all those pop-up menus. I can still go back and only edit in one place, where I need to make a correction to my code, and that'll be reflected in every call of that procedure. So what's really nice again about procedures is they make it easy to centralize writing your code, maintaining your code, breaking your code down into small pieces. So that's the basics of working with procedures. There's a lot of other things that we'll talk about as we move forward. Like I said, we'll talk about returning values when we get to Python. We'll talk about pass by reference, pass by value. We'll talk a little bit about recursion, which is a process by which methods call themselves. So this idea of wrapping functionality into procedures is super helpful, and hopefully this helps you get started on this week's assignment and helps to get you started in writing procedures.